Hello and welcome to Nithrania YouTube channel. You're watching another episode of the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec and in this video we're going to learn how to play Imperium Classics and Imperium Legends. The rules are the same for both boxes. At the end of the video I also explain most of the generic keywords you can find in the rulebook. I don't explain all of them because some of those keywords are really self-explanatory and they don't need any clarifications, and some of those keywords only refer to one specific card, so if you need to check how that card is played, you can find it in the rulebook. There is another separate video in which I'm going to talk about the solo rules, and now let's take a look at the rules for the multiplayer game. First, choose a nation and all the cards of that nation. Those cards have the same color in the bottom left hand corner. If you play a 3-player game, remove all the cards with this 4 players symbol, and if you play a 2-player game, also remove all the cards with this 3+ symbol. Then prepare your play area. First, place this power card in front of you. This is the card with this symbol, and you can place it with this A side up or with the B side up. It's your choice. For a first game it's recommended to use the B side. Once you choose the side you will not be able to change it later. Then place this state card next to the power card with this Barbarian side up. Place this accession card face up in your area, that's the card with this symbol. And then take all the cards with this symbol, these are called the nation cards, shuffle them and place them face down like this on the accession card. This is called the nation deck. Then place all the cards with this star symbol face up in your play area. These are called the development cards. And finally, take all the remaining cards without any symbol in the bottom left hand corner, shuffle them and place them next to your power card. This is your draw deck. Leave some space for the discard pile and draw 5 cards from the draw deck as your starting hand. These cards are kept hidden from other players. If you have any cards with this arrow symbol, set them aside for the moment. They will be added to the deck of common cards. Then give each player 3 material tokens, 2 population tokens and 1 progress token, then 3 action tokens and 5 exhaust tokens. If you play with Utopians, you only take 3 exhaust tokens. Some nations in the game may have slightly different setup. Vikings, for example, don't have any development deck. Atlanteans start the game with their state card with the Empire side up. Arthurians start the game with 2 starting cards and their development cards are called quests. And finally, Utopians play completely differently. They have 3 starting cards, but they don't have any nation deck, any accession card, they don't have the development deck. They're very unique. I will explain some of the differences of these nations at the end of the video. Then prepare the common cards area. Place these market tiles like this and sort all these common cards by their type. You can identify the type by the color of the banner and also by the icon at the bottom of the card. These red cards are unrest cards, these are fame cards, region cards, uncivilized cards, which are the cards with this green symbol, and these are civilized cards, and the cards which have both the uncivilized and the civilized icon count as the uncivilized for the setup. Finally, these blue cards are called tributary cards. Again, if needed, remove the cards with the icons for 3 players or 4 players if you play with lower player count. Then, you can keep the unrest cards face up in this area. If any nation has the unrest cards with these arrow symbols, add them to the deck of these common unrest cards. Take these fame cards, find the King of King card and place it with the A side up in this space. Then shuffle all other fame cards and place them like this on top of the King of King cards. And in a 4-player game, keep all the cards in the deck. In a 3-player game, remove the top card of the deck from the game. And in a 2-player game, remove 1 additional card from the game from the top of the deck. Then shuffle these 3 stacks separately, and from each deck, place 6 cards in a 2-player game in this space, 7 cards in a 3-player game, and 8 cards in a 4-player game. keep all the remaining cards nearby. Reveal the top card from each deck face up. Then take these tributary cards and shuffle them with all the remaining common cards and place this main deck in this area. Then reveal the top 2 cards face up. Then under each uncivilized, civilized and tributary card, place 1 unrest card from the stack. Place 1 progress marker on each civilized card without the uncivilized icon. That means that if we would have the card with the civilized and the uncivilized icon as well, that card would not have the progress marker. Randomly determine the starting player and place this Solstice card to the right of that first player, so between the first and the last player in a player order. If you have both boxes, Imperium Classics and Legends, you can use the nations from any deck, and you can also use the common decks from any box. However, only use 1 common deck of each suit. So, for example, you can use regions from the Classics box, you can use the Uncivilized and Fame cards from the Legend box, but only use 1 common deck of each color. Furthermore, don't mix the cards of the same suit from the Imperium box and the Legend box together. If you already did, don't worry, look at this code in the bottom left hand corner of each card, and the code which starts with the number 1 is from the Classics box, the code which starts with number 2 is from the Legends box. And when you play with the nations from both boxes, check the common deck of the tributary cards, and if it contains a card with the same name as the nation in the game, remove that card from the game and replace it with a random card from another box. This is the only time when you actually do mix the cards from both boxes together. The game is played in a series of rounds, and each round players take turns, starting with the first player and then continuing in a clockwise direction. On your turn, you have to choose one of the following 3 options. The first is to activate your cards. That means you can play cards from your hand, and depending on the type of the card, they will either stay pinned in your play area, or after resolving the text on the card, they will be placed directly into your discard pile. And in addition to playing cards from your hand, you can also use the exhaust abilities on your cards, so the abilities with the exhaust keyword, and that is indicated by this exhaust token, which is placed on the activated card. The second option is to innovate. With that, you take all the cards from your hand and discard these cards to the discard pile, and you may take 1 card from the market or from these face down decks. The card goes into your hand, however, when you innovate, you may not play the cards from your hand and you may not activate the exhaust abilities. The third option is the Revolt action. The best use of this option is when you have too many unrest cards, because with this option you may take as many unrest cards as you want from your hand and return them back to the unrest stack. Again, you may not play any cards from your hand and you may not activate any exhaust abilities on your cards. After taking the turn, you will perform the cleanup, you will collect all your tokens back to your state card, you will draw cards from your draw deck up to your hand limit, and if eligible, you will gain cards from your nation deck or later in the game from your development deck. At the end of the round, when all players have taken their turns, perform the Solstice phase. All players may activate all their Solstice effects on their cards. After that, start the new round with the starting player. The game end can be triggered in several different ways. First, when you have to refill an empty space in the market and the main deck runs out. Second, when this Fame deck runs out and any player activates this King of Kings card. Or if any player develops their last development card, that also triggers the end of the game. Regardless of how the end game is triggered, finish the current round, including the Solstice effects, and then perform 1 final round, including that Solstice phase. After that, the game is over and proceed to final scoring. There are 2 major sources of victory points in the game. First, these progress tokens, each is worth 1 victory point, and second, all the cards with this yellow circle in the bottom right hand corner, all those cards score victory points at the end of the game. If you have any unrest cards, they also score victory points, but they score negative victory points at the end of the game. You don't score for cards in your nation deck or development deck, so those are the cards which you have not developed as the civilization over the course of the game. There's one other way how the game can end, and that's when the deck of these unrest cards runs out. The moment someone takes the last card from the deck, the game ends immediately. Players don't even finish the current action. Then there is no standard scoring, progress tokens, and these points are worth nothing, and the player with the fewest number of these unrest cards wins the game. When you choose the activation option, you can play cards from your hand and activate the exhaust abilities on your cards in any order you want. If you need to pay any resources, return the indicated number of the tokens from your supply to the general supply, and if you don't have the required tokens, you may not take that action. When you have to spend these population tokens and you don't have enough, you may spend progress tokens instead of the population tokens, and each progress token is worth 1 population token. The same applies for the material tokens, but this time each progress token is worth 2 material tokens. However, you may never simply convert progress tokens into population tokens or the material tokens. You can only substitute them when you pay resources. On your turn, you always have 3 action tokens available, and that means you may take 3 actions. To take an action, take the action token from your state card and place it nearby, and take a card from your hand and resolve the effect on that card. Then, if the card has this pinned symbol, it stays in your play area, and in many other games these cards are called permanents because they stay permanently in the game, but they can be removed from this play area later in the game with some other game effects. When you play the card which doesn't have this pinned icon, after resolving the effect on the card goes into your discard pile. Unless the card specifies a different location, this card, for example, would be placed into your history, and I will explain that term in just a minute. Most card effects contain specific keywords, which I'm going to explain later in the video, and when you play the card, you have to fully resolve its effect, or as much as possible. If the card text says that it's a free play, you may play the card without spending the action token. That means you may play the card even if you don't have any more action tokens available. However, there is one limitation. Each card with this free play text can only be played once per turn. When you gain an action, return one of the action tokens back to your state card, and that means you have 1 additional action available. If you gain an action and all your action tokens are on the state card, you gain additional action token temporarily for this turn only. Cards with this red Barbarian symbol can only be played from your hand if your state card is with this Barbarian side up. When your state card shows the Empire side, you may not play these Barbarian cards from your hand, but if you have any of these cards in your play area, you can still use any exhaust effects on those cards. Similarly, the cards with this blue Empire icon can only be played if your state card is with this Empire side up. Then, in addition to taking actions and playing cards from your hand, you can also use the exhaust abilities on your cards, obviously only on the cards in your play area and on your power card. And when you do, take the exhaust token and place it on the card, and then you can resolve the exhaust effect on that card. You can only place the exhaust token on the card if the card is empty, which means you can use these effects maximum once per turn. The second option on your turn is to innovate. When you innovate, you may not take any actions and you may not use these exhaust tokens to use exhaust abilities on your cards. The only thing you can do, and you must do, is take all the cards from your hand, discard them to the discard pile, and then you can break through for a region card or uncivilized, civilized, or the tributary card. First, choose a suit. Let's say we want to break through for uncivilized card, and then take the card of that suit from the market without taking the unrest card. unrest card is returned back to the unrest pile. If there are any tokens on the card, you take the card with the tokens as well. Place the tokens into your supply and the card goes into your hand. If you don't want the card of the chosen type from the market, or if there would be no card of that type in the market, you may take the top card from the corresponding mini deck. If that corresponding mini deck would be empty, start drawing cards from the main deck until you find the card of the chosen type, and then you must take that card. Then reshuffle all the revealed cards back into the main deck. These blue tributary cards don't have any dedicated mini deck, so when there is no tributary card in the market, or if you don't like the card which is there, you may search for that type of card in the main deck, and again you take the first card of that type you reveal. If the card of the chosen type is not in the market, and you start searching the main deck and you don't find the card of that type, you simply gain 2 progress tokens. When you take the card from the market, you have to refill the empty space with the card of the same type. Draw the top card from the corresponding deck. And again, if you add any uncivilized, civilized or tributary card to the market, always stack an unrest card from the unrest pile under that new card. If the corresponding mini deck would be empty, draw the top card from the main deck, and in this case it may happen that the type of the card drawn doesn't match the symbol above the card. Again, if needed, tuck the unrest card under the new drawn card. The purpose of these mini decks is to ensure that in the early stages of the game, all these card types are always available. The third option on your turn is to revolt. Again, you may not use any action tokens, you may not take actions, and you may not use your exhaust tokens, but you can return any number of these unrest cards from your hand to the unrest deck. Unlike the innovation, you are not forced to discard any remaining cards from your hand to the discard pile. After taking your turn, always perform the cleanup. First of all, take the progress marker from the general supply and place it on any card in the market. Just to reiterate, the market are these 5 face-up cards. Unrest cards are not in the market. Then return all the action tokens back to your state card and return all the exhaust tokens from anywhere in your play area back to the state card as well. Make sure that you always have 3 action tokens and 5 exhaust tokens. 3 exhaust tokens when you play with Utopians. That means if you would have gained any additional action tokens during your turn, those would be now discarded. Then you may discard any number of cards from your hand to the discard pile and draw new cards from your draw deck up to your hand limit, which is 5 cards at the start of the game. If for any reason you would have more cards in your hand than your hand limit, you are not forced to discard any of those cards into your discard pile, you just don't draw new cards. Then, when you have to draw the card into your hand and your draw deck is empty, if your state card shows this Barbarian side, take the top card from your nation deck, place it into your discard pile, then shuffle the discard pile, create the new draw deck and draw the remaining cards. At the same time, take one of your exhaust tokens and place it on your nation deck. That means that you can only do this when you have the exhaust token available and there is no exhaust token on your nation deck. And when you do this during your cleanup phase, you do it after you return all the exhaust tokens back to your state card, which means that this exhaust token will remain on the nation deck until your next cleanup phase. And that implies that when you manage to cycle through your draw deck again, during your next turn, you have to reshuffle the discard pile and create the new draw deck. However, you don't add any new card from the nation deck because it's exhausted. So each turn you can only add 1 card from the nation deck into your deck. Then, when your nation deck is empty and the next card you add to your deck is this accession card with this symbol, immediately change your state card to the Empire side. You still have to place the exhaust token on the nation deck, and the only reason for this is to make sure that you spend one of your exhaust tokens. And remember, with the Empire side up, you are not allowed to play the Barbarian cards from your hand. However, all the Barbarian cards in your play area remain in this area, and you may still use their exhaust abilities. When you have to draw the card and your draw deck is empty and the state card is with the Empire side up, you may now add the cards from your development deck. The process is the same. You have to use the exhaust token and place it on the development deck, but unlike the nation deck, since all these development cards are face up, you can choose any card from that deck, pay the resources shown in this white bar on the card, and if you wouldn't have those resources, you would not be able to develop that specific card. And again, take the card, put it into your discard pile, shuffle the discard pile, create the new draw deck, and draw the remaining cards. When you add the accession card to your discard pile, there is another reason why the exhaust token is placed on the nation deck, and that is when you manage to cycle through your draw deck again while you are still having the exhaust token on the nation deck, and you would have to draw the new card, which means you can add the cards from your development deck. Since there is no exhaust token on the development deck, if you have the resources, you may pay those resources and develop the card from the development deck. Only then place the exhaust token on the development deck. Then during the cleanup, you would return both of these tokens back to your state card. After the last player in a player order finishes their turn, perform the Solstice phase. All players perform their Solstice effects on all their cards. These are mandatory unless the card says that you may do something. If you may, the effect is optional. Players perform these effects simultaneously, and if you have more cards with this effect, you can resolve them in any order you want. The game end can be triggered in several different ways. First, when you have to refill an empty space in the market and the main deck runs out. Second, when this Fame deck runs out and any player activates this King of Kings card. Or if any player develops their last development card, that also triggers the end of the game. Regardless of how the end game is triggered, finish the current round, including the Solstice effects, and then perform one final round, including that Solstice phase. After that, the game is over and proceed to final scoring. To calculate the victory points, count the number of the progress tokens you have collected over the course of the game. This token counts for 5 progress tokens, this one for 10. So in this example we have 18 progress tokens, and each progress token is worth 1 victory point. Then add the value of your cards, which is this number in the yellow circle. Some of the cards have the specific number, and that's the number of victory points you score for that card. Some of the cards have this question mark, which means the number of victory points you get from this card depends on where the card is at the end of the game. And some of the cards have this star symbol, which means you score victory points based on the condition which is stated next to that symbol. For each unrest card you have, you lose 2 victory points. So, since there are cards, the value of which depends where these cards are at the end of the game, before you start calculating your score, keep the cards where they are in your play area. First, you don't score any victory points for any cards in your nation deck, and you don't score the victory points for the cards in your development deck, which you still have not developed. Actually, you may put these cards away together with the state card. Now, everything under your power card is called your history. Make sure you don't mix these cards with any other cards in your play area, because some of the cards score victory points only if they are in your history. Then the cards in your hand, in your discard pile and in your draw pile can be mixed together into one pile. And finally, keep your cards in your play area in a separate group. This seems to be the most comfortable grouping of cards before you do the final scoring. And don't forget, you also score victory points for the cards which are garrisoned, including the garrisoned unrest cards. After calculating the final score, the player with the most victory points is the winner. The game can also end if the deck of Unrest cards runs out. If you take the last card from this deck, the game ends immediately, players even don't finish the current action. When the game ends with a collapse, don't calculate your final scores, the player with the fewest number of Unrest cards wins the game. Again, also count the Unrest cards which are garrisoned. Only in case of a tie, break the tie by calculating the score in a normal way. In this section of the video, I'm going to explain many keywords you can find on the card. And I'll start with the acquire keyword. Acquire is very similar to breakthrough, but you can only acquire cards from the market, from these face-up cards. So if the card type you want to acquire is not in those face-up cards, or there is a card which you don't like, you may not take the cards from the face-down decks. The second difference is that when you do take the card from the market and the card has the Unrest card underneath, you take both of the cards, so you also take the Unrest card. Add both of the cards into your hand. Everything else is the same as with the breakthrough. You would now draw the new card. If it's uncivilized, civilized or tributary card, you also place one Unrest card underneath the new card. When you have to exile a card, you have to take an eligible card from the market and place it to the right of the market board. If it had any Unrest card underneath, return that card to the Unrest deck. Then again, refill the empty space with a new card, and if needed, place an Unrest card underneath the card. You may never exile a card with tokens. You can only do that if the exile effect allows you to swap the cards. That means that you can take the card from the market and swap it with one of the cards from the exile, and in that case, the tokens that were placed on the original card will be placed on the new card. Again, if needed, place the Unrest card under any uncivilized, civilized or tributary card. You may even acquire cards from the exile, and when you do, and the card type is uncivilized, civilized or tributary, take the Unrest card with it as well. When you have to put the card into history, tuck it underneath your power card. Atlanteans and Vikings don't have any history. If the card would be placed in the history, it would be discarded. Now, the cards in the history are basically out of the game, but they score victory points at the end of the game. You may look at these cards anytime you want, but other players may not. If you would have to draw the cards from your history, you can choose any card from that history you want. If you would play with Atlanteans, they don't have any history, but the area underneath that power card is called the flooded area, and it works in the same way as history. And the keyword sink means that you have to put the card in that flooded area. Same like putting the card into history. However, if Atlanteans would have a card which would tell them to put it into the history, the card would go into their discard pile. You can recall only one of your pinned cards, one of your permanent cards, and when you recall them, you put them back into your hand. When you have to abandon a card, again you can only abandon a pinned card, but this time the card goes into your discard pile. When you play a card and the card allows you to garrison another card, take another card from your hand and tuck it underneath the card you have just played. One card in play can have unlimited number of garrison cards if some game effects allow you to do so. Garrisoned cards are not considered to be in play, but they score victory points at the end of the game, and if the main card is abandoned, recalled or put into history, all the garrison cards go with it. So in this example, if the card would be recalled, the main card and also all the garrisoned cards would go into your hand. When you can return a card, you can return the card from your hand, unless specified otherwise. Some game effects allow you to return the card from your discard pile, for example. When you have to take the card, you always take it into your hand. When you can give cards to other players, again, you give them to their hands. If any game effect refers to cards in play, it means the cards in your play area. It doesn't mean the cards in any player's area, only in your own one. In this last section of the video, I'm going to talk about few more areas of the game worth mentioning in this video. The first area are these purple cards, the Fame cards. You can gain these cards through some game effects, like the card called Glory, which requires abandoning 3 regions. So you must have 3 region cards in play and they must be abandoned. And then you may look at the top 2 cards of the Fame deck. You look at these cards secretly, choose one of the cards and return the other to the top of the deck. The card you take goes into your hand. If there is only 1 card remaining, you look at that 1 card and take it. Then, when you have to look at the Fame cards and there is no Fame card available except for the King of Kings, instead of looking at the cards, you resolve the effect on the King of Kings cards and flip it to the other side. This triggers the end of the game. Other players may still resolve the effect on this side of the card, but this one is weaker than on the previous side. Furthermore, each player can only trigger this card once per game. On many region cards, you can find these symbols, which by themselves they don't do anything, but they can be referenced by other cards. Usually you will gain some resources based on the number of these symbols visible in your play area. In general, region cards allow you to garrison other cards and thin your deck. When you play the card with this symbol, these are attack cards and they affect other players. You must always resolve the effect as much as possible, but other players may have the cards which prevent the negative effects from these kind of attack cards. Now, it may happen that with some of the card effects, the active player may give unrest cards to other players. If there are not enough unrest cards in the unrest deck for all the players, the active player decides which players get these cards, because once the deck runs out, the game ends with a collapse. When playing with Arthurians, you will not have the standard regular development deck, but these cards are called quest cards. Arthurians have 2 starting cards, and with this King Arthur's Court Solstice ability, if there is no active quest, you can choose any of these impeding quests and tuck it under the King Arthur's card, and that card becomes the active quest. Then some specific cards, like Merlin in this example, may allow you to draw the active quest into your hand. So the active quest card is actually added to your hand, and then there is no active quest. And since there is no active quest, with the next opportunity you can add another from the impeding quests as your active quests. This Graal card can only become an active quest as the last card. And finally, Utopians play very differently. They still play using the same rules, but they have 3 starting cards. You as the player are on a journey to Utopia, and these 2 additional starting cards represent that journey. Place the Vision of Shangri-La card on top of the Gates of Shangri-La. Only this top journey card is inactive together with all its abilities, and this card can never leave play except for its Solstice ability. On your journey, you will progress from Visions of Shangri-La to Path to Shangri-La, then to the Gates of Shangri-La, and finally to the Shangri-La itself. When you resolve the Solstice effect of this card, you trigger the end of the game. So that's how you play Imperium Classics and Imperium Legends. If you have any questions or comments, I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. If you like the series, please subscribe. You can even support the channel on the Patreon page. My name is Branislav Berec, you've been watching Game in a Nutshell, and hope to see you next time. I would like to thank everyone who has ever supported the channel, and especially the current supporters listed on this page. If you too would like to support the channel in creation of videos like this and other video tutorials and other content on this channel, please visit the patreon.com/Nithrania.